Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and we have another deck from Jacques today with Winota, Joiner of Forces. So Jacques says that they're looking for advice on consistency and mana and whatever you see it needs, and the restrictions are no positive mana rocks or fetches. As always, this deck list will be in the video description below. And if you're taking a look at this video, I would heavily recommend you open it up, take a look, see if anything sticks out at you, see anything you can suggest that I haven't thought of, and if you think of something I haven't thought of, please go ahead and put it into the comments below so that we can both work on making this deck even better. So Winota, who is Winota and why are we using them as our commander? If you're familiar with Pioneer, Winota is a very strong creature. So she says, whenever a non-human you control attacks, you look at the top 6 cards of your deck, and then you take a human out of that deck, out of the 6 cards, and put it onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It then gains indestructible for the turn, and the rest gets shuffled back down to the bottom. Now, what's really strong about Winota is that you can trigger her multiple times in one turn. In fact, that's the goal. You want to play Winota and you want to trigger her, 2 to 3 times, immediately look 20 cards deep, and hopefully get some of your strong humans into play. You'll also note that Winota herself does not require to be attacking for this to function. You can go ahead and summon her, and while she has summoning sickness, you can go and attack with others. So this build is very much so kind of an all-in build where there is a lot of non-human creatures that cost 1 to further strengthen Winota and make sure she can go off as early as possible. Let's take a look at the curve. You can see we have an extra little column for 0 mana, which is always nice. Once again, when we have 0 mana creatures, we have to assume we're going to be a very combo-oriented deck. And with 0 mana creatures, these kind of ensure that we have more attacking creatures on the turn Winota comes out. With the goal being that Winota should come out turn 3 or possibly turn 2, which I don't think the deck can actually do. Let's see. No, I think that's not possible. You can no, you could play a Soul Ring and then another land, and as long as you have 0 mana artifacts, 0 mana creatures, you can attack. Okay, so it is possible. So turn 2, but probably more realistically turn 3. So having 0 mana creatures to enable that is pretty good. The rest of the curve looks perfect. I really like this kind of curve, especially since we have to remember our last few, like our highest mana creatures, are all creatures we intend to cheat into play. In fact, you can see everything except for Kiki Jiki in the 5-drop slot are all creatures that are humans and therefore are all intended to be cheated into play. So looking at the list, we have a really nice variety of creatures. We have creatures that are, super aggressive, the 0 mana creatures whose entire purpose is to trigger Winota. We've got some protection creatures, which is also particularly good. And then we have, let me see, a few kind of hate creatures, like Dreadeth Magistrate, Thalia. I think I saw one more that I saw. Some just defensive and aggressive, Spirit of the Labyrinth. These creatures that aren't humans, except for Thalia is, and so is Dreadeth Magistrate, actually. We'll come back to that in a second. But we put these creatures out, they kind of slow down the board, and we're going to take advantage of that in order to push in our advantage and get Winota out without losing her to counter magic or removal. So, what kind of sticks out to me? Well, I'm going to start with what I feel a few cards that this deck is missing. So there's this weird kind of mix here. So Mother of Runes, or Mom as she's known, and Thalia Guardian of Thraben both exist in a very particular space, where they are what I would consider to be defensive or proactive protection creatures. Thalia is kind of a stacks beast, but Mom especially is a proactive protection creature. She is very, very good and very underrated sometimes. But one of the problems with her, as you might notice, is that she's a human. Now, I don't think we should not play Mother of Runes. I think she's very, very strong, but we should be aware of the tension that provides because it's not so much you're going to see her in the six that you look at the top of your deck and play her. It's more so that if you play her early and you just need one more Winota trigger, she can't actually, trigger Winota. So we should keep Mom, but we should think about something like Giver of Runes or stepmom, as some people call her. Now she's a little pricier, almost double the cost at about $10, but she is a core, which means she will trigger Winota when she attacks. Her rule set is also a little different, which is nice to have the variety between the two of them. But already that's something I'm thinking of. The next thing I'm thinking of and I'm just thinking, actually, I should say one or two more specific ones before we get into more general. Our new human King Theoden. Sorry, I was just trying to remember our Lord of the Rings king. Theoden says whenever he enters or another human enters, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Now, I'm pretty sure I didn't see Theoden in there, but I would very, very much, yes, very, very much recommend Theoden. He has a very, very high ceiling where the earlier he comes out, the more double strike triggers you can get. If you have like four Winota triggers, this could mean giving four creatures double strike potentially with Theoden. But the floor is actually really high too, because Theoden himself triggers his own ability. So if Theoden is the only one you get, being able to give something double strike is still really good. Now, early on, you might not be lucky enough to get like some of your really intense creatures, but if you happen to flip like Angrath's Marauders or any of our other 4/4s or biggers, um, giving a double strike can do potentially a lot of damage. And it can get through blockers with creatures that you might be a little more, I don't know, let's say a little more worried about. Something like Spirit of the Labyrinth is quite a squishy creature to blockers, but if you give them double strike, all of a sudden they should be able to punch through most token blockers, most small creature blockers. So that's pretty good. It's important to remember that its target creature gains double strike until end of turn, not target human. The next thing I want to quickly point out, and this isn't necessary, but just something I think about, I see you have Kiki Jiki here. Kiki Jiki is a great card, does a lot here, does a lot in a lot of decks, but one of the main perks of Kiki Jiki is that Kiki Jiki allows you to immediately win the game sometimes. And what you need is a second creature to let you do that. Now, there's a few different cards that do this. Fedelar Sovereign. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that one right. Where are you? No, that's the wrong one. Uh, let's see if we can find it. 4 mana, white, cat, and exile. Let's see if we can find it. Felidar Guardian. Felidar Guardian is one option that when it enters the battlefield it flickers, but actually here I would prefer Restoration. I prefer Restoration Angel. Restoration Angel has flying, has flash. Now it doesn't exile any permanents in the same way that the Sovereign does. The Guardian does, but it does blink non-angel creatures, which you have, I would say, a pretty high. I don't think you are actually playing any angels that I saw, and even if you were, I think it would be just like one. Yeah. So Restoration Angel will immediately blink anything which can protect it if you hold up 4 mana. But also with Kiki Jiki, it goes infinite. Kiki Jiki creates a copy of Restoration Angel. Restoration Angel untaps Kiki Jiki. You and so on and so forth until you have infinite restoration angels and you can attack all of the table. Now, the thing is, neither of these halves of the combo can be pulled out by Winota, which is a little too bad, but at the same time, both halves of this combo trigger Winota, so once again, yeah, it's a little column A, a little column B. It's pretty neutral, I think, in a deck like this, and so I like its inclusion, but I'll leave that up to you. It is an I win combo. That's, to be fair, kind of hard to set up in this deck, but if are you the kind of player that doesn't like those, you know, like you already have an I win combo with Breath of the Fury and Aura Touch Mage will allow you to attack infinite times as long as you still have humans out of your deck to put on. And I think that's really, really strong. So this could work as a kind of a backup to that. The next thing I want to think about a little bit is mana. So one of the main things we have two aspects to the deck that help the Winota plan, right? One half is we're using cards like Thalia, Garden of Thraben, and where are you? Diranith Magistrate to kind of impede our opponents from interacting with us. But the other half is we're using cards such as Skirk Prospector, where's our ape? Um, Simian Spirit Guide, and mana rocks to power out our commander early in order to take advantage of it. And if our commander gets destroyed, we want to buy out that commander again. So what I would like is, in addition to more mana rocks, which we'll get to, I would like if an opponent has more lands. I think that's the correct text. So what we want, no, it's not has, it would be control. There we go. I wouldn't mind at least Loyal Warhound, but I'm pretty sure there's a few more cards like this. Now, they're not all as clean as Loyal Warhound, but that straight up just look and say, if an opponent controls more lands than you, search for a basic, put it into play. Now, it's a basic plains, but still, that is ramp, and this is a non-human creature, and therefore will trigger Winota. Now, you're not going to always be able to trigger this on turn two because if you're playing first, for example, or if you're playing at a table where your opponents have like there's no green or they're not playing very aggressive ramp strategies, this may not be a turn two play. But when it is a very, very strong one. When your previous opponent goes rampant growth or three wishes or something of the like, and then you get to play Loyal Warhound, building your board and ramping yourself, that's particularly strong. The other one that comes to mind is Flash in white, creature, 2 mana. We got these set of Archivist of Ogma and Deep Gnome Terramancer, which once again I don't believe you're playing either of those. All right. These guys aren't too expensive and they're very, very strong in white strategies. Both of them are non-humans, which is why I particularly like them. The Archivist says whenever your opponent searches their deck, you draw a card and gain a life. Depending on your opponents, this can trigger a lot or this can trigger a little. For example, if your opponents have fetch lands, this is very good. If your opponents are playing tutors, this is also very good. Now, if they're not doing that, this may not always be as strong, but I will say that your opponents that play like Cultivate and Kodama's Breach will also trigger Archivist. And if Archivist can draw one card, you've kind of hit neutral and you're happy to keep, you're happy at that because the main reason you're playing this card is to trigger Winota and not so much to like draw 4 or 5 cards. And everything I said also applies to Deep Gnome Terramancer. I like Deep Gnome Terramancer a little less because they're a little trickier to trigger, which basically says whenever lands come into play in your opponent's battlefield and they weren't played, and that means literally from hand as their land drop, you get a land. So once again, very good against fetch lands. Once again, Very good against like Cultivate and Kodama's Reach effects, things like that. Any kind of ramp effect, this is generally very good against. You can only do it once a turn, so there is a limit and your opponents can play around it. But once again, that's fine. If you get a land off of Deep Gnome Terramancer, you're probably happy because once again, the main thing you want from this is that it can attack and trigger Winota. In the same way, I'm looking here, we're kind of low. I would like Boros Signet as well. Low on mana rocks. I don't think it can hurt. A turn 2 mana rock isn't ideal, but it is because it's not a creature, but it does let you play Winota. And you have to remember that you are playing 3 0 mana creatures, and if you want to play these 0 mana creatures, you want to turn 3 Winota. So playing Ornithopter and a 1-drop, and then turn 2 playing like Boros Signet and turn 3 Winota, yeah, you don't have as many creatures as you could, but it's fine. It still sets up to be exactly what you want it to be. Also, very notably, I noticed you're playing Gold Mirror and Ornithopter Paradise, but you aren't playing. I don't remember. Whoops. I don't remember which one is. Oh, third try. The red one. I'm thinking some kind of rusted metal. Oh, now it's angry that I've opened too many. Alloy, Alpha, Copper. No, Copper's green. Iron Mirror. And you're not playing Iron Mirror. So just out of curiosity, why if you're gonna play them, you might as well play the whole set. There's no reason not to play them. Soulless Jailer is fine. Combat Celebrant is great. Glow Rider is great. Is Glow Rider a human? Yes, Glow Rider is a human. I know it doesn't say human on it, but it is a human. So just remember that because this card hasn't been printed with its updated text. So people might not be sure if it's a human or not, which makes it on the same note. So what if we prefer, let's go non-creature spells cost more. We also have Vern Wingmare as an alternative. Vern Wingmare is non-human, so it will trigger Winota, and it's the same stat line but has flying, which means it can attack with Winota out and be a little safer. So with that in mind, I do prefer Vern Wingmare in that sense, but otherwise they're very, very comparable. The rest of the deck looks pretty good. I don't have too many problems with it. I think it works really straightforwardly, and I do like that. One of the things that I'm immediately kind of I have a tough time with is that we have a lot of creatures, like a lot of creatures, but we do not have a lot of card draw. So we're kind of living and dying on the back of Winota, which isn't a problem. This is what the deck wants to do, but it's something that we should be kind of thinking of in terms of how we're going to play out the deck and what kind of hands we're going to keep. This is a very mulligan heavy deck where you absolutely want to keep a strong starting hand because if you pick a hand that's kind of weaker, you're basically behind for the rest of the game. Now, something I might think about is a reanimation spell. Let's go white. So either we want one of those or one of those. So return to ranks will bring X. It's a convoke spell and it says it'll bring back X creatures that are 2 mana or less. You have quite a big selection of 2 mana or less, and most of them are made to trigger Winota. So already I like this here as an option to get your cards back. Alternatively, a little clunkier is Dusk to Dawn. So is a board clear that will destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, and Dawn is return all 2 power or less creatures from your graveyard to your hand. Now, I think I'll suggest Return to Ranks before Dusk to Dawn because in this deck you don't have a way to discard Dusk to Dawn, so you have to cast Dusk in order to have access to Dawn. And a lot of your payoffs and Winota herself are 3 power or higher. And in fact, you do have what I would consider a decent. Can we see a graph for power? I wonder if that's an option here. Click the bar, number of cards, mana value. I guess not, but that's okay. We could probably do it by view, group by. No, power is not an option. Sort by. Yeah, unfortunate. That would be really helpful here to see how much of your deck is 2 mana or 2 power or less. But Dust to Dawn can still be good. It's not necessarily a bad card because once Winota, because Winota doesn't always stay on the field. It's one of those cards that's really good when you're behind, because if Winota is not on the field yet, or Winota has been taken off the field and you don't have any 3 power creatures, this is a very, very clean 4 mana board wipe that lets you keep your creatures. And then after which, Dawn is just particularly strong to cast later in the game to basically draw 4 to 5 cards with very few downside. But I still do prefer Return to Ranks here because it does represent a higher, with Convoke, you can push X pretty high and gain back like a large amount of your army. Finally, I'm trying to think of anything else that could be useful. I think this deck needs a way to function without Winota, and I think what you have here is a pretty standard, we call white weenie, but like go wide with small creatures kind of deck. And what immediately comes to mind that's new that could work very, very well here is Invasion of Gorbakan. Wow, that's kind of gone up in price to $6. But Gorbakan says that when is this the one that I think? Yeah. So Gorbakan says for 2 mana, you're gonna look at someone's hand, one of your opponents, and you're gonna exile a card and basically apply commander tax to it. This is good because there's no way for them to get around that. And with that in mind, you can kind of get rid of a problematic card for a while, especially if you know which player has board clears or which player naturally kind of, you know, is against your strategy. And alternatively, this is a great political play where you can play this and say, I'll target someone, but I want the other two player, like, you look at player A and you say, if I target player B with this, will you give me some room to build up? And they might say yes. Alternatively, you can even tell someone, hey, I'm going to give this to player B and take one of their cards out. In exchange, can you attack it? Once again, if they destroy your invasion, you get it anyways, which is pretty cool. This is to You will have to remember this is a bit of a nombo with your two deafening silence and rule of law effects because it's not a transform, even though it says here. You have to cast it after you exile it. So you'll attack it, you'll take all the counters off, it'll go into exile, and then you can cast it from exile on its other side. So just be aware of that. But if we're doing all of that, what's on the other side? Well, on the other side is actually a pretty good card for this deck called Light Shield Array. So Light Shield Array says at the beginning of your end step, you get a +1/+1 counter on each creature that attacked. Now this is really cool because if you attacked to flip this, those creatures will get +1/+1 counters. So you get the ability almost instantaneously, which is something I really like. But it also rewards you for doing all the attacks that you want to be doing anyways, and some of your 0 mana creatures, let's say Ornithopter, all of a sudden can slowly build into something respectable because you have access to +1/+1 counters. Is it going to be something like great? But like Ornithopter, if you can put 2 counters on it, a 0 mana 2/4 is pretty good, right? That's fine. And then the real reason that, or I should say the second reason that we're playing this is Lightshield Array has a sacrifice ability, which lets you give your creatures hexproof and indestructible. This deck is particularly susceptible to board wipes, and you're already playing Selfless Spirit, which is another, where are you? Here we go. Another protection from board clears. It doesn't hurt to have one more. All right, those are my main thoughts. I've looked through the lands. The lands seem perfectly manageable. If you're You've mentioned that you don't want fetch lands in here, and without fetch lands, this is pretty close to as good as it gets. Uh, there's there's a few cards that you can add in. If you're playing Ash Barrens, the new Shire card, which will take a second, Shire Terrace, that works kind of like an Ash Barrens, where it comes in with colorless, and for 1 mana, you can sacrifice it to get a basic land tapped. It's close. Both of these cards are very comparable, so if you're playing one, it probably doesn't hurt to play the other. But after that, you're pretty close to what I would consider, where I'd want this deck to be. Obviously, Needle Spires, Rustvale Bridge are a little, and Sacred Peaks are the weaker. The Temple as well, because all of these come in tapped, and you really, really don't want your lands to come in tapped. But without fetch lands, you're kind of stuck to an extent of what you can pick, so they're not the worst choices. All right. I hope this was very helpful. If you have a new version of this deck, I'd love to see it. Or if you have a new version of any deck, I'd love to see it. Please send me the deck list using the form that is in the video description below. And if you'd like to, support the channel by liking, commenting, subscribing, all the YouTube stuff, I would be very, very grateful. The channel is still growing and we appreciate all the help we can get. All right. I'm excited to see more Winota. Good luck.